Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in to Insight's webinar, The Future of B2B E-commerce is Omnichannel. We're excited to unpack exactly what that means with you today. In this webinar, you'll learn about how omnichannel commerce has been redefined for modern B2B buyers and how traditional, self-service, and emerging channels can thrive together. Plus, you'll learn how leading organizations have transformed to support omnichannel buying experiences. My name is Karie Daudt, and I'm your host. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience at Insite Software. My background includes industrial distribution, manufacturing, and technology industries in a variety of roles, including sales, marketing, and management. I'm fascinated by the B2B customer experience as it relates to the entire commerce journey and believe it's in digital commerce that goes beyond a website and truly beyond commerce itself. I'm excited to welcome our guest, John Bruno from Forrester. John is a senior analyst at Forrester and helps e-businesses and strategy professionals assess, improve, and optimize B2B and B2B2C e-commerce and configure price quote technologies and strategies. John is a lead author of Forrester's 2018 B2B e-commerce playbook and provides a unique lens for businesses to learn how to improve sales outcomes in today's digital age. John is an advisor to many Fortune 1000 companies and is widely quoted in major industry publications. He frequently speaks at conferences on customer engagement strategies, channel partner enablement, and digital transformation. John earned his arts degree from Boston College, where he double majored in economics and philosophy. With that, I'll go ahead and turn over the webinar to John to learn about his perspective on omnichannel commerce. Welcome, John.
Hi, Karie. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. Today's topic is one that I'm extremely passionate about. And as a little bit of additional background, I want to talk a little bit about my coverage at Forrester and how it's come to be where it is. So before shifting my focus onto digital and e-commerce in particular, I led Forrester's research practice on CRM and Salesforce automation. So I come from the world where salespeople are worried about automation, they're worried about digital self-service, and they have a bleak outlook on their careers. In fact, it wasn't more than 3 years ago that we at Forrester predicted that 1 million salespeople would be displaced due to increasing buyers' desire to self-serve. Now, in that story, it's not all black and white, and there's certainly plenty of nuance. But it's important to know that sales and sellers have a role in the future of B2B commerce. It's just that role needs to be aligned with the needs of your buyers, and our data says that those buyers want to self-serve more. So like I said before, this is something I'm extremely passionate about, and I'm passionate about it because it's been the core of my research now for years. So when we talk about the future of B2B e-commerce, what does that really mean? I think it's important for us to define omnichannel in this context of B2B. And I'm certainly not a fan of throwing out buzzwords without the appropriate context. So for omnichannel commerce, we see that as a holistic approach for selling to and servicing your customers across all physical and digital touchpoints. Now, I imagine for many of you on the phone, that's somewhat of a departure from the way that you conduct your business. And for others on the line, I imagine it might be even more of a radical change from how your business operates today. So why should we change? And why should we think about changing now? After all, B2B sales is about relationships, right? And your salespeople have been in their roles for years, decades even. And over that time, they've developed really strong relationships with your customers. Not only that, but they've probably developed a pretty good system to help themselves be successful. And if you've done that, odds are you've started standardizing some of those best practices. And once you've established this well-oiled machine, it might look a little something like this. You've gotten to the point where you've systemized things down to a science. Every successful deal should look something like this. Of course, you have to know your market. You have to understand the accounts. You've trained your sales reps. You've probably done some optimization of account alignment. You've identified the appropriate sales opportunities, and you walk down a pretty prescriptive process. Now, sometimes that process might deviate. Something goes a little differently. Maybe there's discounting along the way. But when all goes well, you win the deal, you rinse, and you repeat. But, and it's a very big but, if you listen closely, you'll notice a glaring absence of one very important thing in that description. It's your customer. Now, this process was designed to make selling easier, but it has no bearing on making buying easier. So that's what we're here to talk about today: how to meet the buyer where they are, delivering the experiences they need to make the buying process easier and more effective for them so they can focus on being successful at their own job. So really what this all boils down to, at its core, is a fundamental recognition that your selling and sales processes are not the processes that your customers go through when they're buying from you. It's now time to take that customer and move them to the center of your universe. So at Forrester, we've been tracking customer behavior and trends like these for decades. And what we've seen, especially lately, is that B2B buyers are changing. In fact, I have conversations on an almost daily basis where I can actually feel companies start to see this light. They start to recognize these patterns, and they start to recognize that now is the time to act. In fact, very recently, I had a conversation with the commercial leader of one of the world's largest manufacturers. And we had a long conversation, and the conversation became very candid. And what that commercial leader told me was that their customers and their buying journeys have changed, but the way we sell to them has not. Now, it might be simple at face value, but what it does is it highlights this massive disconnect between the parties on the buying side and the parties on the selling side. So when we think about how this B2B buyer has changed, let's take a closer look at them. So for starters, that B2B buyer, we had tabs on them. We knew who they were. These individuals were diligent and they were very thoughtful in their decisions, but most importantly, they were fiercely loyal. These were the people that valued the relationship over anything else, and they were unlikely to work with competitors. They were unlikely to let one bad experience shake them. But as digital technologies emerged and rose to popularity, we started seeing a change. Confidence in the buying process became different. It became all about self-service and discovery. And now, like a bad experience that you might have with Uber might make you try Lyft, a bad experience with, say, an office supply company might make you now try their competitor. And so that B2B buyer of today has changed dramatically. They've become more emotional. And so what I want to focus on is kind of the old way of doing things versus the new way of doing things. And I like this example here of the phone. Even though the iPhone revolutionized telephones, what's important to note is that there's still plenty of places and times for phone calls. So in the B2B world, e-commerce and self-service has revolutionized the way that organizations sell. But I want you to remember that there's still a place and time for salespeople, but you have to know that the customer expectations have changed on when and where that takes place. So when we look at customers and their behaviors and their experiences changing over time, one of the things that I see is that there's this massive disconnect in experience. For many of those organizations that have seen the light and know that they need to serve their customers from a digital standpoint and deliver more self-service capabilities, what they've done is they've often neglected the individuals on the sales side. And so when we surveyed a number of B2B buyers in this joint survey we've done with Internet Retailer, what we found out is that only about half of the respondents felt like the salespeople they were working with were knowledgeable about their company and their products. Now, that's not a very high percentage, but the scary part is things get worse with the other questions we've asked. So we asked if they felt the salespeople they worked with were knowledgeable about their specific business, if they had that specific context. We asked if those salespeople were able to deliver value, were able to share relevant examples, and were prepared for the questions that their buyers asked. And all of those results were considerably less. And so what we're seeing here behind this data is that as customers begin to embrace self-service experiences more and more, their buying journey becomes increasingly complex. They're getting further down that process before they choose to engage with a salesperson. And for many companies, because of the disconnect between digital and traditional channels, you now have this experience gap where your buyers are coming in with considerably more knowledge and more insight, and your sellers aren't exactly sure where they are. So they're stuck playing catch up, leaving your buyers with a bad experience. But there is good news. And there's good news, especially for B2B buyers. Individuals like you on the line today and your peers have identified that delivering a better experience across the board is a high priority. So in our recent business technographic survey about priorities and journeys, when we asked our survey respondents, they said 68% of them said that addressing rising customer expectations was a high priority. And another 25% said it's a secondary priority. So together, 93% of organizations are very much focused on delivering an overall better customer experience, one that is aligned to the way that your buyers shop. But how do they shop? I had kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the answer is it's complicated. B2B is rife with considerably more complexity than B2C. Of course, the digital touchpoints are there, from mobile and desktop experiences, from brand websites to e-commerce experiences, but there's also interactions with salespeople, with customer service professionals, with your indirect network of dealers, distributors, resellers. And there are some trends across that complex B2B buyer journey that really ring true almost universally. So let's take a look at some of that data. For starters, self-service is overwhelmingly preferred. In fact, in our 2017 survey of B2B buyers, 68% of respondents found gathering information on their own superior to working with a sales rep. They tend to gravitate towards the lower stress environment and the convenience aspect of nearly a 24/7 access to information. And so many of your buyers are evaluating your products and your services in off hours, at night, on the weekends, and times in between. But it's not just about educating themselves and learning about your products. It's also about purchasing. So of those same respondents, 38% of them said that they completed at least half of their work purchases online. So are you selling online today? If not, did you know that your buyers are doing that much of their work on their own elsewhere? Well, we also asked them what the outlook looked like for the next couple of years. So what does it look like 3 years from now? And at that point in time, this same group of respondents said that they're hopeful that they'll be able to complete, 55% of them said that they're hoping to complete more than half of their work purchases online. And so where we are right now, we're in the process of collecting 2018 data. And I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I'd bet you that these numbers are due to increase. So these numbers that we've talked through, these preferences in the experience, both good and bad from each one of your organizations, should point you towards one inevitable truth. And it's that your buyers are omni-channel creatures. Like I said, there's a place and time for each of these channels and each of these touch points. The expectation is on you to deliver against them and do so in a fashion that's consistent across these channels. That means when one of your customers needs to move from one channel to another, from one touch point to another, that they're presented with consistent information and consistent recommendations. So we need to start thinking about the world a little bit differently. And we need to start thinking about self-service not as online-centric, but as digital first. Because we know that's where buyers tend to begin their journey. And conversely, on the opposite side of the spectrum, we need to think about our salespeople differently. And we need to not treat our salespeople as a separate offline channel, but we need to empower them with insights and deliver tools in an equally compelling experience for them to deliver for your customers. Now, at this point in time, you're probably thinking, here we go, talking about customer experience again, but embracing digital is actually really good for your business. And the byproducts of that improved customer experience, those are what drive the tangible benefits and gains for your business. So let's explore some of those benefits in a little more detail. So for starters, digital reduces the cost to serve, especially for the long tail of your customers. Do each of you know how large your total addressable market is? If so, do you think that you have the capacity to reach and deliver for each of those potential customers in the way that you operate right now? So what digital does is it allows your sales teams to have a presence even when they're not there. Even the most relationship-centric businesses, your salespeople can't please everybody all the time. So what digital does is it provides that always-on access to your brand. And the way I like to think about it is your e-commerce site is kind of like the Robin to your Batman salespeople. It always has been, it always has the back of your salespeople when it comes to addressing those in-the-moment needs. And what this does, it allows your sellers to spread their wings, to have personal relationships with even more customers and still serve them in their moment of need. Digital also brings focus to your business. It allows you to unearth a whole new level of engagement. And it's not just from your customers, but also your prospective customers. Your ability to capture data isn't just limited to what your salespeople record. And it's not just limited to what orders you've taken. It now includes things like browsing patterns to highlight what your customers might be interested in. It includes products that they've compared. It includes things like what promotions are starting to catch their eyes. And so by having this more round picture of your customer, what this does is it allows you to interact and work with them in whole new ways. It allows you to better serve them both digitally and in person. And your salespeople with these insights, when they engage with your customers, are less likely to get caught off guard. They're less likely to come across as unprepared or unable to help your customer in their moment of need. Our data also shows that customers that engage with businesses from multiple channels spend more than those that engage with fewer channels. And so this presents a real opportunity to capture not only the hearts and minds of your customers, but also their share of wallet by meeting them where they are. In this last one, this one might be my favorite one, because for many it seems counterintuitive, but it's really powerful. And what it is effective e-commerce strategies really do unshackle your salespeople. It allows them to focus on exactly what they were hired for, being the steward to help your customers understand, gain confidence about, and execute on their most highly considered and oftentimes most high-value transactions. So providing them support from e-commerce, they no longer have to spend their time chasing down reorders or those small transactions. What they can do in turn is focus on driving value, generating exposure to the parts of your product catalog that your existing customers aren't already tapping into. And they can also bring on and grow new customers. So before wrapping up, what I wanted to do was go through a few tips for driving omnichannel success. And here, we've talked about the what. We've talked about how digital has forever changed the way B2B buyers interact with businesses. We've also talked about the why. We've talked about capturing the customer in their preferred channel, when and where they are, and what kind of business value that delivers. But let's really take some time and explore the how. And for this how, I've recently been doing a lot of research in interviewing a lot of commerce leaders at large B2B organizations, and I'm happy to give you early access into those insights and some of the lessons learned from them. So for starters, don't fight unnecessary battles, specifically over commissions and payments. Your e-commerce investment really has two crucial customers. Firstly, it's that end buyer. It's that person who's looking to engage digitally. It's that person who's looking to self-serve, to do their research, to transact on their own. But your second customer, and dare I say equally important customer, is your sellers. Your salespeople can unlock your e-commerce potential, or They can block any and all success. Really, it's up to you. The first surefire way to make sure you block your success is to not incentivize them on e-commerce transactions on their accounts. They will intentionally sabotage your e-commerce initiative if you do that. That's why when I spoke to the head of digital commerce for a large beverage producer, she told me that removing incentives was a non-starter. In fact, when she joined that organization, she told me that she asked the interviewer if the salespeople would be incented. And had they not, she would have gotten up and left. Because that's how critical she saw salespeople and their buy-in to her ability for her ability to drive e-commerce success at that organization. Next, even without stonewalling success of your e-commerce initiatives, sellers don't necessarily get the value out of these commerce investments. So in today's day and age, sellers have a myriad of tools. Like I had mentioned at the top of the call, I came from a background of traditional sales technologies, and there's dozens and dozens of categories, each with dozens and dozens of vendors and solutions in those categories. But in today's day and age, even with that myriad of tools at their disposal, rarely do organizations give the proper credence and support to their e-commerce platform as one of them. So I was recently talking to a leading shoe manufacturer, and they actually use their commerce platform a little bit differently. They use their commerce platform as a digital collaboration board. They allow their sellers to assemble lists of products or even build carts for their customers. So when they do have that human-to-human interaction, they have something tangible and visual in front of them that they can go through, explore, and talk through. And this becomes the basis of their value-add conversations they have with their customers. So in this space, they were able to talk about things like seasonal lineups for products specific to each of the stores they were selling to. Now, the experience then moves from more of an analog one at worst, and it starts moving towards a digital conversation. It moves to a real-time conversation. And during that conversation, the buyer or seller can swap one item out for another, or continue to iterate and work back and forth until they arrive at the ideal product mix. But what's best of all is when all is said and done in that conversation, they know that a transaction is just one click away. And as a result, they've seen their conversion increase significantly. But it's important to know that e-commerce is more than just standing up a digital team. It's about putting the people, processes, and technology in place to drive success. Yes, you can expect digital marketers and merchandisers, but I was talking to a leading furniture supply company, and their team looks a little bit different. It's more round. They also have an analytics team to disseminate insights to both their commerce team and their sales team. What's really interesting is that digital team at that furniture company, they also have sales enablement as a remit under their guise. And so what that means for them is they need to make sure that field reps and customer service agents know how to use the platform, that they're ready to teach buyers how to use that platform. In fact, that company actually rolled out a $1,000 spiff for individuals in their customer service organization to start to help people understand how to use their commerce platform. And what that resulted in was about 300 new commerce accounts for customers to self-serve. So $1,000 in the next quarter netted over $100,000 in self-service revenue. That's how important they see enablement to their commerce success. And they also have an operations team. And that operations team is there to listen to and to get feedback from both the buyers and the sellers so that they can optimize the tool for usage across all parties. So you have to start thinking about that organization as more than just a digital team. It's enablement, it's operations, it's insights, it's so much more. And specifically on the topic of sales enablement, your omnichannel commerce success requires the combination of consultative selling and buyer enablement. And so as more transactional purchases move towards self-service, and sellers play a more influential role in those highly considered purchases, the dynamic of that B2B salesperson changes. Their ability to understand your customer, to empathize with them, all of that increases. They really have to flex their consultative muscles and their problem-solving skills in order to address the needs of their buyers in those kinds of situations. But they can't do that if they're constantly capturing orders. That's why a leading janitorial supply company focuses on change management and modifying the buyer role and seller roles in conjunction with their sales leader. And so this role has shifted to include more buyer training, better buyer self-service support, and creating access and roles for multiple individuals at that buying organization. And so by fostering self-service, you're able to create more buyer autonomy. And what that does in turn is elevate the level of discussion and consideration for higher value and more important purchases. So what did buyer enablement look like for them? Well, that organization has 2 weekly webinars. One is for internal users to make sure that they're up to speed with all the changes on that commerce platform and they're equipped to convey those changes and to inform their buyers. The other webinar is directly for their buyers to make sure that they're removing any roadblocks in their buying process. In doing so, they've really elevated the role of the consultative seller in their organization. So at that point, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. I do want to pass it over to Karie for her insights and if you have any questions on the line.
Great, thanks, John. I apologize. We really want to address as many of your questions as you can. So please feel free to type your question in the question box, and we will get to those questions shortly. Our goal is to really make this as much about you and your questions and your needs as much as the content. John, this was great. I really appreciate everything you said. And I have a couple things that I'd kind of like to unpack a little deeper with you. First of all, you talked a lot about the branded manufacturers, which we all know is a big part of this commerce journey. But there's a lot of other types of manufacturers and distributors that play in this space that also have commerce and digital challenges, right? So I think of manufacturing, we think of the branded manufacturers. We also think about those specialty manufacturers that are making products that never actually get to a consumer. Those products would be really focused on those OEMs, those machine builders that then get those machines that go into their plants or their manufacturing facilities. And those distributors that really focus on not only those finished goods types products, but also those specialty products. So I kind of want to address or ask you any questions because obviously this buyer and selling experience is very different for a branded manufacturer than it is for a specialty manufacturer or a distributor. Can you just touch on that at all?
Yeah, so for the branded manufacturers, because they're producing a lot of finished products, there's a lot more to educate on. And so for those individuals, we have a lot of conversations around content and product information because our data shows that buyers from branded manufacturers, they prefer to actually work directly with them than through another channel because of the quality of information, the level of authority there, and the confidence in what they're getting back on the other end. And so for those individuals who may even have vast product catalogs of specific products, specific finished products, it's about helping your buyer navigate to and understand the products that are best fit for them. And so I was actually talking to a branded manufacturer recently of ceiling fans, of all things. And one of the things that he told me that was crucial to their e-commerce journey was that, they started going through this process of, even though it's ceiling fans, there's still plenty of complexity in them, started removing elements of complexity from that understanding part of the process. And they were doing so to make it easier for their salespeople to sell. And they got about 3/4 of the way through that process and they said, what are we doing? if we're going this far to make it easy for our salespeople, why don't we go one step further and provide a little bit more simplicity around this process and expose that to our buyers? And so that's kind of the dynamic of the branded manufacturer, is making it easy for the end buyer to understand the value they can get out of the purchases that they're making, and how those will be used. Now, for that manufacturer that might be selling components or parts that then in turn make their way into another product, largely there, you're talking about really expansive catalogs. You're talking about folks that might be doing a lot more reordering, things of that nature. So when you start thinking about the experience that you deliver for them, they typically know what they need and how that will be used. And so it's about making their routine processes a lot easier. And so when you start thinking about things like that, your salespeople in those situations know exactly how your parts are going to be used in their finished good. They know the kinds of materials that they need, and you can start kind of simplifying the buying process to allow those individuals to focus more on their day job, or to focus on other tasks. So you start seeing things like, I know company X is going to buy this volume of ball bearings on a regular basis. Why don't I set up this list that they can quickly reorder from? Or if I have those insights, like I said earlier, about digital bringing focus to your business, if I have those insights and I know that one of those manufacturers who's using my components has not placed a reorder in the same kind of time window that they typically do, it allows me to have those insights, pick up the phone, make a call, and see what's going on. And maybe they forgot to, maybe it showed some signs of risk in the business that the salesperson can mitigate. So definitely different needs on either side, but can all be delivered, with the same kind of strategy that we've been talking about today.
Right. And some of the things that I see coming from industrial manufacturing and industrial control distribution, 99% of the business that I did was dealing with these OEMs, or with the distributors who are then selling to those OEMs. And one of the things is, depending on the environment. So one of the companies we worked with, as an example, was a large automotive manufacturer. And our parts were used in their manufacturing process, went into big punch presses, went into engine RFID engine tracking. So a lot of different applications. And because their environment is so harsh with chemicals, so harsh with, every single product. So one of the things that can be unique about these OEMs is that they need a SME, a subject matter expert, that's really speccing these products. And once the products were approved and signed off on, and they would get samples, all those things, they would really limit their products that they would buy to a very select catalog. So their buyers were never allowed to go outside of what has been approved. And this is common in that type of industry. So we were making a lot of custom catalogs for them. Obviously, their pricing. And one of the things we were able to really manage is those custom catalogs. And so some industries have very strict, stringent rules, because some of these roles, you're talking about human safety. So deviating products. So sometimes the subject matter expert, or that researcher, is really the ultimate decision maker in the buying process. So commerce and digital enablement can also really help you manage those levels of complexity that are hard to do with traditional catalogs and some of those things. So those are some of the advantages that digital can really play. The other thing that's nice is you can create those sites to be very branded. So the experience for those buyers and those engineers who are looking for content that's very specific to their industry is all really tied to them and their needs. So that's just one point I just kind of wanted to make, kind of relative to the difference between those branded and some of those specialty manufacturers as well. The next question I had, John, is kind of about the millennial buyer. I know we spent a lot of time talking about them, and that they just want to self-serve, that they don't want to interact with people. We've been doing some research, and what we've really been hearing from those millennial buyers is, while they like to self-serve when they can, they're very comforted by the fact that if they need help, they know that that help is available. Do you have any other comments or feedback on that, kind of that statement?
Yeah, actually, that exact question came up, or that topic came up. I mentioned I was talking to a leading janitorial supply company recently, and that was what he noted as one of the big changes in their business was they found that a lot of the buyers were younger, in this millennial generation. And the behaviors that he noticed from them was that, yes, they did prefer to self-serve. These individuals grew up in the digital age. They are digitally native from day one. But what he also noted too is that the volume of for most of you on the phone, it might be an RFQ process where they engage a salesperson. For this organization, it was almost I'll call it an RFD, request for demo. So this janitorial supply company obviously sells chemicals and cleaning equipment, but they also sell $25,000 industrial floor cleaners. And as part of the buying process, it's pretty common to show up at a location, clean an area of floor, and that's part of the evaluation. And so those millennial buyers who were self-serving for a lot of the lower end or lower value products, they were also the same individuals who were more likely to ask for a demo and more likely to engage a salesperson and have them come in and have them demo that product. So, like I said before, we've talked a lot about what's the future of sales and, what does the future hold for salespeople in particular. And for those highly considered purchases, we're not moving to a world where everything is self-service. Just like we can't live in a world where everything is assisted service. There's going to be this blend, and the millennial generation's no different there.
Great. Thank you for that. One of the other things that we've seen, having been in B2B e-commerce for 15 years and having come from the customer side and then the commerce side as well, adoption on technology is and you touched on this, right? Is that if your salespeople are not on board and not engaged or feel threatened by your commerce platform or your commerce initiative, what we've seen is people invest heavily in commerce and then have less than 5% for commerce, or our commerce is not successful in our business. And one of the things that we really ask and get into when we see those situations is how engaged is your sales team? How can your sales team use your platform, use your commerce technology to see what their customers are doing, regardless if they're buying through online channels or traditional channels? Making that data not just in the ERP or not just in the commerce, but that blend where you can really see both sides of what your customers are doing. Having been a salesperson and having worked with a lot of salespeople, the one thing that I've heard over and over, and I know from experience, is that I don't want to be a successful salesperson and not know what my customers are doing. So when you don't think about that omni-channel experience and how it impacts your salespeople, your CSRs, your field service people, all of those pieces together really give your customers the experience that they're looking for. They don't want to transition from a digital experience to a traditional salesperson and have to start over. They want to be able to continue that journey in a very seamless way. So those are some of the things that we're seeing that I think are really relevant to the journey that people are on today with this omni-channel experience.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly there in that notion of kind of bringing the two worlds together. Universally across almost every interview that I've done on this omni-channel topic, the number one theme that kind of came out loud and clear is it kind of started more so with sales, but also encompassed customer service as well, was engage early and engage often. Like I said, your counterparts in other parts of your organization can be, the critical gating factors for your success. And so it's not just a one-time process to say, okay, let's make sure people are on board, that they're aware, that they're trained. It's how do we continue to operationalize and optimize how we're leveraging this technology for all of our customer-facing touch points, be them sales, customer service, or a digital storefront.
Great. And then I just have one other point, and then we've got a lot of really good questions, so I'd like to get to questions here so we can really spend the majority of the time remaining on questions. One of the other things is I want to talk about analytics and behavior and how analytics really plays a role in not only your commerce experience, but your traditional sales experience. So when you look at analytics, so an example of this is cart abandonment on B2B e-commerce platforms. A lot of people think that you can look at B2C e-commerce cart abandonment and get a feel for B2B. And what we're seeing is that's not true. And the reason for that is that somebody may start self-serving and then realize that they need assistance. So they may transition out of your digital experience, abandon their cart, go to a traditional salesperson and finish that process because they recognize the fact that they need assistance. So you can't just look at like things like cart abandonment. You have to look at cart abandonment, and then you have to look at, did that customer transition to a traditional sales and complete that purchase? So analytics plays a really, really important role. And when you think about analytics, it shouldn't just be your Google Analytics data and your commerce data. It should also be your ERP data. You need to be looking at that holistic view of what's really happening with your customers so that you can really address both digitally and traditionally what things may need to be different, or what needs your customers may have that you weren't aware. So let's transition into questions. Here's a good one for you, John. Should e-commerce be a part of marketing or sales?
We've kind of touched upon this one a little bit, and actually one of the exercises that I've gone through recently is I was digging through about 75 different org charts from different types of B2B organizations. And largely it's scattered. It varies. For me personally, I go back to the earlier slide on the customer journey and how complex that customer journey is. But again, our data shows that the customer journey is increasingly starting online. It's increasingly starting through Google searches and navigations to these B2B commerce sites where folks can kind of gather information on their own. And so since it's part of kind of that discovery phase and that research phase of the buying process, marketing plays a crucial role. So I think for B2B e-commerce in particular, I think it's very successful when it sits under marketing and there's extremely tight alignment with sales. So it's an overall commercial strategy that gets executed between marketing and sales, with a lot of the commerce capabilities and requirements and responsibilities falling under marketing. But some of the key points there is that your sales leaders need to be supporting and consulted throughout the process. And one critical juncture where you can continue to drive ongoing success is that role of sales enablement. So for a lot of B2B organizations, sales enablement does fall under marketing, but interfaces actually a majority of their time with the sales organization. So I think by having it be under marketing and being very tightly coupled to sales, and even using that role of sales enablement as another way to anchor sales and marketing together, I think for me anyways, that's the ideal situation.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it really makes marketing become much more critical and much more important in these B2B manufacturing and distribution companies, where traditional marketing in manufacturing and distribution used to be really focused on marketing communication, Marcom. It's really kind of changing as you really add digital, and the skill sets and the requirements and the knowledge is really changing. And I think that's part of it. When you start really thinking about your company, you also have to think about the people you have in your organization that may be able to fit into some of these roles, because you get out of this traditional model and you may find that there are really good places for people that you have, you may recognize that you don't have a lot of strategy that goes around those decisions. So I appreciate what you're saying very much.
Yeah, and like you said,
Here's
around
another
the
good
people
question.
that
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, like you said,
Go
around
ahead,
the
John.
people that you have at your organization, the other element of it too is knowing that when you look at the B2C world, a lot of the B2B organizations that I talk to, they've brought in some talent from B2C, and so they're able to marry the kind of the tribal knowledge, the industrial know-how, the complexity of B2B with some of those industry-leading B2C practices as well. And so when you look outside, and if you need to augment your existing staff, those are the kinds of individuals that you're going to bump into. It will be more marketing focused, and so they can really come in and help transform your organization as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen in that is, and I'm actually going to be doing a blog post about this, is that the one thing that I really see though is some of these B2C marketers come in and they don't really understand B2B. And when you're thinking about, so they get real caught up in the front end experience of their e-commerce, and they're looking at the what I call the kind of the sex and the flash of the commerce. The one thing you have to be aware of is there's a lot of those experiences that you deliver on the front end of your commerce experience are driven from those back end requirements, the personas, the people that you're serving. So, especially when you get outside of the branded manufacturing role, you have to be really cognizant and understand your business model, who your customers are, before you get really caught up in just that front end sex and sizzle. And I know you and I have pretty strong opinions on what personalization means in the B2B world. But that's just one of the things that I want to say as a caveat when you're thinking about the B2C is that they really need to understand that journey of their customers. I've seen a lot of companies come in with B2C marketers. They really focus on that front end. And then what we've watched over time is they start backing out some of that front end experience to make it more relevant for their customers. And it's just save money and really try to get it right the first time.
Yeah, it's kind of like finding a unicorn. You have these folks that have experience in the commerce world, albeit B2C, but the right fit is someone who has that experience and someone who is incredibly humble. It knows what they do not know. In that it's the complexity of B2B, it's the dynamic of relationships, both the interpersonal and the transactional relationships, and being able to marry some of the commerce know-how with the vast amounts of complexity and nuance required to run a B2B business.
Right, and that's the first way to lose your salespeople support. It is different. One of the other questions that came up that's really good is what role does technology play in the omni-channel journey relative to both buyers and sellers?
Yeah, so I think I started talking about this a little bit with regards to digital bringing focus to your business. So obviously, as buyers increasingly prefer to start their journey online, you're talking about powering that self-service experience all the way from discovery and search and navigation to the appropriate products, to powering, like you mentioned earlier, the visibility of the appropriate product catalogs, to powering inventory access, availability access, pricing, that's all part of that process that technology empowers for the buyer. Now, for the salesperson, you had kind of alluded to it earlier. A lot of where I think the value starts to begin is around insights. Salespeople are only as good as the insights they have, both about their own product catalog and offerings, but also the insights and context they have about the buyer. So it's up to me as a salesperson to know what you've bought in the past, to know how you've engaged with our brand in the past. So one way is starting to kind of aggregate those insights, surface them from your ERP, from your commerce platform in a way that your salesperson is now knowledgeable about the history of that relationship. Moving beyond that, I think technology can actually play a pretty critical role in the future as well, as with regards to the salesperson kind of being part of the architecture of that buying experience. So when it does blur the lines between self-service and assisted service, how are your salespeople supporting your buyers in their preferred way of buying? So one of the things I had mentioned earlier is the kind of concept of creating lists or making reordering easier. Having a salesperson be able to go in, order on behalf of the customer, so they have that kind of visibility in their commerce platform, to be able to go in and start to architect lists for reordering, or for certain jobs. If you're on a construction site, everything you're ordering is pertinent to that experience. And so what I see in kind of the long term is this world where that commerce platform has different experiences for different users, and really what it starts to mesh into is this digital collaboration board, where sellers and buyers can go back and forth, eventually aligning on the right products and services for their need. But in the near term, it's about sellers using that same technology with the same product catalogs and pricing and availability to architect the buying experience for their customers.
Yeah, and to kind of pile on to that, I agree with what you're saying. And list management is something that we really focus on, that you can actually use list management to build a list of new products that you think as a salesperson that are relevant to your customers. And one of the things your customers can do then is they can choose to buy from that list. They can edit the products on that list. They can save it for later. There's a lot of things that you can do with list management. Some of the other things that we really think about from technology is, who are your customers and how are they working? So we think a lot about, do you have customers who are contractors, as an example, and they may be out on a job? And one of the things that we see happen all day long, and you alluded to this as a project, that they're adding consumable products. Maybe as a contractor, they're adding nails, they're adding screws. There's those consumable products that they're using on their job all day long. A lot of times what happens today is those lists get written on a piece of paper and handed to the job soup at the end of the day. With list management, that's collaboration. You can share that list by that job. Allow people with their mobile phone to just even scan the barcode to add those products to a list, and then roll that list up to the soup at the end of the day and let that supervisor place that order. They can review, they can edit, they can delete, they can add, and then submit that order. On top of that, now, rather than your team sitting at a will call desk waiting for that order the next morning, which happens every day, they're able to go to the job site and those products can be there when they get there. So thinking about how that experience goes across that buyer and that seller. We also think about things like notification, letting your salespeople know when their customers are engaging. So there's a lot of those type of tools that really help enable not only the buyer but the seller to collaborate through their commerce tool. The other thing that we really think about is, how do you combine sales enablement tools, mobile technology, not just responsive websites, but actual mobile technology. If your buyers are out in the field, how they can take advantage of, quick reorder, those type of things. So it's really thinking about your customers, your internal salespeople, your CSRs, your field service people, and your salespeople, and anybody else who's interacting with that customer, and what role they're playing and how you can kind of bring that together. So that's kind of how we think about it. I hear a lot about it from customers as well. I have one more question, at least here, John, that I really like. How critical is integrating marketing automation, CRM, ERP into the omni-channel strategy?
Wow, that's a big one. There's a lot to unpack there. The short answer is, in my opinion, very critical. The longer answer is, there's so much stuff that happens behind the scenes that's required in order to make that in-the-moment experience for the buyer a pleasant, easy, and effective one. So, for instance, you talk about integration with the ERP. If you're servicing pricing from your ERP, if you're servicing availability from your ERP, just think about the front-end experience for the buyer. If they go ahead and add these 10 items to their cart and check out, and they're expecting to get them, sooner rather than later, but, there isn't that integration, you're not servicing that availability, and now you have a customer service issue where you need to, contact that buyer and say, I'm sorry, but it's going to be delayed. So integration, although it's a back office technology with ERP, for instance, really can damper and hinder the customer experience. Now, when you think about it from the CRM perspective, there's a lot that happens there. There's a lot of engagement that happens that's non-transactional that really helps shape and inform how you engage with your buyers and with your customers. But even if you think about it from a customer service perspective and kind of an agent desktop experience, being able to see what those interactions were like, being able to see what kinds of orders have been placed and when those have been placed in that experience allows those individuals and enables those individuals to deliver a better experience, so they can be more informed, have a good idea about the context of those interactions as soon as they happen. And then from a marketing automation standpoint, yes, you're capturing a lot of data, both from the human-to-human interaction like we talked about there. You're also capturing a lot of the browsing patterns and history, and you're starting to see kind of heat for each of those customers and what they might be interested in. And with marketing automation, you can start to drive more collateral, better messaging, and kind of help usher your buyer down their journey based on stuff that's specific to them, that's personalized for them. But none of that happens if you don't have a complete and integrated view of who that customer is. So each of those different systems you mentioned all have their merits with regards to integration and priority. But a holistic strategy that brings them all together ensures that you're at least in the best possible position to deliver a better customer experience, both from a digital standpoint and from an assisted standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about, so large companies, enterprise grade companies may have all of these tools separately. Smaller companies, these mid-sized organizations, smaller companies, they may not be in a position to buy those best of breed solutions from all of those different technologies. So one thing to consider when you're thinking about this is, what do you really need for your organization? And, there are platforms that really have a lot of this in their base platform, that you can take advantage of so that you don't have to go out and buy best of breeds of everything. You can use a lot of what exists if you're looking, really looking at the right platforms and really understanding what those platforms are truly capable of and what you really need for your customers. We talk a lot about CRM Lite, PIM Lite. We talk a lot about those things because not all organizations are in a position to go out and buy those best of breeds. The other thing that we see a lot is that, the ERP user interface for the CSRs, et cetera, may not be a great experience. And that if you use the right platform and that you're integrated into your ERP, we have a lot of customers who go beyond that omni-channel and actually start using their e-commerce platform is their window to these different systems. Because one thing that happens is your commerce system is integrated into multi-systems. So it's taking disparate information from different systems and displaying it so you can actually use your commerce platform internally and not have to be flipping from one platform to another to another. So there's a lot of ways that you can use that tool internally to also drive efficiencies within your organization, which is a really big part of this. So we are at time. I'd like to thank everybody. I'm sorry, we have a lot of questions that we're just not going to get to, and I apologize for that. We really appreciate you joining us today. We hope that you found this valuable. If you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. This is Karie Daudt from Insite. More than happy to answer your questions, address your questions, get you answers if we were not able to get to your question. And we really appreciate you taking the time. And I'd really like to thank John Bruno for taking his time today to join us on this Omnichannel webinar.